For as long as I can remember, my mother's holiday gatherings have been legendary in our small Connecticut town. Her Christmas Eve dinners and Thanksgiving spreads were the social events of the season, with her perfectly coordinated table settings featured in local magazines twice. Growing up as Jessica Reynolds meant watching my mother, Eleanor, orchestrate these flawless affairs from behind the scenes, polishing silver that had been in the family for generations, pressing napkins into precise folds, and reminding me constantly that presentation is everything, Jessie. When I was 23 and announced my pregnancy with Tyler, my mother's champagne glass froze halfway to her lips during our weekly Sunday dinner. My father's fork clattered against fine china. The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know about how they viewed my situation. Unmarried, just starting my career as a nurse, and now expecting a child with my boyfriend of 2 years. Sound well, my mother finally said, setting down her glass with the careful precision that always preceded her most devastating remarks. I suppose we'll have to help you figure this out. By figure this out, she meant steering me toward options that didn't include keeping the baby. When I refused, the disappointment settled into her features like frost. She didn't say I'd ruin my life, but the sentiment hung in the air during every interaction that followed. Mark and I married in a courthouse ceremony when I was 6 months pregnant. No Reynolds had ever been married without the traditional church wedding and country club reception. My mother didn't attend. My father came alone, looking uncomfortable in his suit, kissed my cheek, and left before we could take him to lunch afterward. Tyler was born healthy and perfect, with a shock of dark hair that matched his father's. My parents visited exactly once in the hospital, staying 20 minutes, my mother never asking to hold him. They sent beautiful gifts, the expected silver cup engraved with his initials, the traditional Reynolds family christening gown, but the warmth these items should have carried was absent. By the time Tyler was 2, Mark and I had found our rhythm as parents. When I discovered I was pregnant again, we were thrilled. Emma arrived 10 months before Mark accepted a job offer in Denver. That would double his salary, but move us 2,000 miles from Connecticut. The distance from my family felt less like a sacrifice and more like a relief. We settled into a modest 4-bedroom home in a family-friendly suburb. Mark's career in medical device sales took off, while I worked part-time night shifts at the local hospital, allowing us to avoid childcare costs. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable. More importantly, we were happy. Our home was filled with noise and mess and love, everything my mother's pristine house had lacked. The first year in Colorado, my mother called in early November. "We're finalizing the guest list for Christmas Eve," she said. "Your father and I would love for you to come. It's been too long." My heart lifted. Perhaps the distance had softened her. "We'd love that, Mom. The kids are so excited about flying." The pause that followed was brief, but unmistakable. "Oh, Jessie, I meant just you. Or you and Mark, of course. The children are wonderful, but they're still so young. And you know how formal our Christmas Eve is. The guest room is being redecorated anyway, so there isn't really space." I watched through the kitchen window as Tyler helped Emma build a snowman in our backyard, his 5-year-old earnestness as he showed his sister how to pack the snow just right. "Mom, we're a package deal. If there's no room for my children, there's no room for me." "Don't be dramatic, Jessica. You could stay in your old ring, and Mark could use the pull-out sofa in the den. It's just for 2 nights. And where exactly would my children sleep during these 2 nights? Well, perhaps you could leave them with Mark's parents. The fact that Mark's parents lived in Arizona and barely knew our children didn't seem relevant to her. "No, Mom, that's not happening. It's a sophisticated evening, Jessica." Children change the entire atmosphere. I ended the call shortly after, a familiar hollow feeling expanding in my chest. When Mark came home, I told him we'd be having Christmas in our own home. He looked relieved. This pattern repeated for the next 3 years. The invitation would come, always for just Mark and me, never the children, and I would decline. My father occasionally called separately, his voice carrying a hint of sadness when I described Tyler's Little League games or Emma's dance recitals. Experiences he knew only through photos I emailed. Once, he asked if he could FaceTime with the kids, but my mother's voice in the background cut the call short. The year Tyler turned 8 and Emma was 5, we added another member to our family. Charlie was a surprise, a wonderful, exhausting surprise that turned our lives upside down in the best possible way. Mark's career had continued to advance, and we'd moved to a larger home in a better school district. The house needed work, but it had potential and character, with a sprawling backyard that backed up to a nature preserve. Most importantly, it had enough bedrooms for our growing family and a massive open kitchen living area, perfect for entertaining. That November, the familiar call came. This time, I didn't wait for my mother to exclude my children. "Actually, Mom, we won't be traveling this year. Charlie's still too young for that kind of trip. But we'd love to have you and Dad come here for Christmas. We have plenty of room, and the kids would be thrilled to have their grandparents here." The silence on the other end lasted so long, I checked to see if the call had dropped. "Have Christmas there?" she finally said, as though I'd suggested celebrating on Mars. "Yes, Mom, here, in our home, with your grandchildren, who barely know you." "Jessica, we've never spent Christmas away from Connecticut. The tradition is exactly that, a tradition, not a law." "You've never even met Charlie, Mom." "He's 9 months old," she said defensively. "A cup isn't a relationship." After more circular conversation, she promised to discuss it with my father and call back. She never did. Christmas came and went, with video calls to both sets of grandparents. Mark's parents cooed appropriately over the children's excitement. My mother commented on the disorganized pile of torn wrapping paper visible in the background. The following spring, I received an unexpected call from my father. "Your mother had a small stroke," he said, without preamble. "She's going to be okay, but it was a scare." I flew to Connecticut alone, leaving Mark with the kids. At 65, my mother looked suddenly older, smaller in the hospital bed, her usually perfect hair flat against the pillow. For the first time in my adult life, I saw fear in her eyes. During that week-long visit, something shifted. We didn't have any dramatic heart-to-hearts. Eleanor Reynolds didn't operate that way. But she asked about the children, listened to stories about them without checking her watch, and even laughed at Tyler's 8-year-old humor when I related. Before I left, she squeezed my hand and said, "Perhaps we could visit, when I'm stronger." "We'd like that," I said, surprised to find I meant it. Summer passed without a visit. Fall arrived with its usual rhythms: school for the older kids, playgroups for Charlie, work for both Mark and me. I'd recently been promoted to nurse manager, a position that offered better hours and pay. Mark's company had restructured, combining territories and reducing his travel. For the first time since Tyler was born, we felt we had found true balance. In early November, I made my annual call to invite my parents for Christmas, expecting the usual decline. Instead, my mother said, "Actually, your father and I have been discussing it. We thought perhaps we would come this year, just for a few days." Joy and suspicion battled within me. Really? That would be wonderful. We could arrive on the 23rd and stay through Christmas Day, if that works for your schedule. I nearly dropped the phone. Yes, that works perfectly. The kids will be so excited. After we hung up, I sat on the edge of my bed, unsure whether to celebrate or brace for disaster. Mark, ever the optimist, focused on the positive. "This is great, Jess. The kids finally get a Christmas with all their grandparents." I nodded, but spent the next 6 weeks in a frenzy of preparation. I deep-cleaned areas of the house that hadn't seen a dust rag in months. I ordered new guest room linens, remembering my mother's preference for high thread count sheets. I planned a Christmas Eve menu that paid homage to her traditional dinner while remaining child-friendly. 2 weeks before their arrival, my mother called again. "I just wanted to confirm a few details," she said, her voice carrying its usual efficiency. "What time should our car service arrive from the airport?" "Oh, don't worry about that. Mark or I will pick you up." "That's not necessary. We can arrange our own transportation." "Mom, it's no trouble, really." She paused. "Well, there's another matter. Your Aunt Sarah and Uncle Robert were planning to join us for Christmas Eve in Connecticut. When I mentioned we'd be in Colorado instead, they expressed interest in coming as well. I hope that's not an imposition." My aunt and uncle, my mother's brother and his wife, were pleasant enough, but had always existed in my mother's orbit, adopting her views and priorities. They had never shown particular interest in my children. "Of course they're welcome," I said automatically. "We have plenty of room." "Wonderful. And I believe your cousins Melissa and Jason might join as well." "With their spouses, of course." I gripped the phone tighter. My cousins, both childless by choice, had always made their feelings about energetic kids abundantly clear. "All of them?" "That's 7 additional people, Mom. 8, actually. Jason's wife is bringing her sister who's visiting from London. Is that a problem? You did say you had plenty of room." I had said that, but I'd meant for my parents. Not for an invasion of relatives who had never bothered to send my children so much as a birthday card. "We can make it work," I said, mentally rearranging sleeping arrangements and calculating how many more place settings I'd need. "But Mom, just so we're clear, this is a family Christmas with children. There will be noise and mess and early morning excitement. This isn't going to be like your formal Connecticut Christmas Eve." Of course, dear, we understand that." I hung up with a sense of foreboding, immediately calling Mark at work. "My entire family is coming for Christmas," I said when he answered. "All of them." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur. I ordered a second turkey, borrowed extra chairs from neighbors, and transformed our home office into another guest room. Mark built a temporary dining table extension, and we pulled our wedding china from storage boxes. Throughout it all, I tried to maintain our family's normal Christmas traditions, baking cookies with the kids, watching holiday movies, and taking them to see the neighborhood lights. 2 days before my family was set to arrive, I walked through our home with a critical eye. It wasn't perfect, but it was clean, decorated, and ready. More importantly, it was still ours. Family photos covering the walls, children's artwork displayed proudly on the refrigerator, and the slightly crooked gingerbread house the kids had made, occupying center stage on the coffee table. My parents arrived first, their luxury rental car pulling into our driveway, precisely at the time they'd specified. My father hugged me warmly. My mother offered her cheek for a kiss before surveying our home with barely concealed assessment. "It's very cozy," she said, which in Eleanor speak meant small and cluttered. The children approached cautiously. Tyler, now 9, extended his hand formally to my father, who laughed and pulled him into a hug instead. Emma hid partially behind Mark until my father crouched to her eye level and produced a small stuffed reindeer from his pocket. Only Charlie, too young to sense tension, toddled directly to my mother and raised his arms. To my astonishment, she bent and lifted him, awkwardly but willingly. "Hello, Charles," she said formally, using his full name, though we never did. He responded by patting her perfectly styled hair with sticky hands. I waited for her to flinch or pull away, but she didn't. The rest of my family arrived in waves throughout the afternoon and evening. With each new arrival, our house grew louder, more crowded, and increasingly tense. My cousins accepted glasses of wine and immediately migrated to the quietest corner of the living room. Aunt Sarah commented on the unique way I decorated our tree, heavy with homemade ornaments and multicolored lights instead of the coordinated, designer decorations my mother preferred. By dinner time, I was exhausted, and we hadn't even reached the main event. As we gathered around our extended dining table for a simple meal of lasagna, my mother visibly calculating the carbohydrate content, I caught Mark's eye across the table. He winked, reminding me why I'd married him. No matter what happened, we were in this together. The real test would come tomorrow, Christmas Eve, when my carefully planned dinner would be directly compared to the legendary Reynolds holiday tradition.